good to see you here tonight, and it's good to be here tonight as we lead into one of our other discussion groups. And this week, we're going to focus on difficult moments in serving God. Now, as we set up this time in sermon and this aspect of worship, what I'd like for you to be thinking about as we look at these two men, Noah and Hosea, who had very difficult challenges, moments in their lives that defined their faith and hopefully would encourage our faith as well and show us what's possible in serving God. I would ask you to think about times that you found to be very difficult in the way that God has asked you to serve. Now, it may not be something that was difficult for someone else, but it could have been for you. You may think about topics that were very challenging to have with people in a particular circumstance. Was it about salvation? Was it baptism, the necessity of baptism? Was it difficult to have a conversation about the nature of marriage and divorce and the consequences of such things, and even remarriage? There can be challenging things in being a Christian today and doing what's right and being faithful. Christians need to find ways to step up to those challenges. We shouldn't be the kind of people that step back from them, but step forward and through them, because we know that God is by our side. And we know that if God has given us a task, it is possible, and He is faithful. So with that in mind, let's look at a couple of people as we set up the discussion groups for tonight. In Genesis chapter 6, we encounter our first and certainly most popular of the two, Noah. In fact, many people throughout the world, whether Christian or non-Christian, have heard the story, the tale of Noah and the ark. But have you thought about how difficult of a situation that must have been for Noah? Read with me here. First in Genesis chapter 6, just to get a little bit of the context, verse 5. Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 lays out the way God was looking down on the earth and what He was seeing in the hearts of mankind. He said, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." That's the nature of the world that Noah lived in. So God looks out and He sees Noah, and He's very mindful of him as an individual. And He takes note in the Bible of several characteristics of Noah. He said he found grace in the eyes of the Lord, verse 8. Verse 9, this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. There was something distinct and very unique and strong about his faith and character and purpose in life. It wasn't with the world, it was with God. And God was going to give him an opportunity, but it was not an easy one at all. Verse 13, God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits." It's about 450 feet. Its width 50 cubits, about 75 feet. And its height 30 cubits, about 45 feet. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it about a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. And you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing flood waters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark. You, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And He tells them to gather the animals together. In this part of the passage, we get very familiar ones of the two animals of each of its kind. In chapter 7, it'll be 7 of the clean animals He would gather after their kind. And He would also be told to prepare food for himself. And verse 22 is really the most telling throughout this, as it says, Noah did according to all that God commanded him. So he did. Wow. Do you ever think about how big of a task that was before Noah? He and his family alone were faithful to God on the earth at that time. And God gives him a task to do, to build this incredible ark, this boat, this structure of a magnitude that had never been built before. And it had such specific expectations that it would be made of gopher wood. And the scale of it was huge, and the making it out of pitch and the preparation and gathering the animals, incredibly difficult to do. And it wasn't because of his own sin, but it was because of the wickedness of so many around him. But it goes even further than that, the difficulty. What was it like when the floodwaters came down and he closed up those doors and he could hear the people outside who could not be on the boat? Was it just yes? Simple? Oh, I don't know. I would find that difficult to be in that situation personally. And what would it be like to spend that year, give or take, on the boat, and when you get off, you come to the realization that you and your family alone are the only people on earth? This was full of a physical difficulty. There was an emotional difficulty, psychological difficulty, but it was faithfulness that saw him cut through all of this. I think the complexity and the difficulties of it, sometimes we forget about when we see the cute imagery that we give, usually with Noah's Ark. But this was an incredibly taxing and laborious endeavor that he had, but he was doing it in serving God, preserving mankind, and faithfully doing exactly what God asked him to do. What a difficulty. There's lessons in that for us. We're going to explore them tonight in our discussion groups for sure. Another man that had great difficulty as well was Hosea, a prophet. This was hundreds of years after the time of Noah and his ark. In fact, the scripture gives us an understanding of the time frame in the very first verse of the very first chapter of the book of Hosea. It's in the Minor Prophets, and it's right after Daniel. If you're looking for it and haven't read it recently, now is a good time for us to explore it. The beginning of it says, the word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. All right, so from the offset, if you recognize these names, you know we're in the time period of the divided kingdom. So well after Saul and David and Solomon, after Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and if you really break this down, you can recognize we're in about the 8th century BC. Long after Noah. But life sometimes comes with challenges, and if you're going to be faithful to God, sometimes there's great difficulties in front of you, and God gave Hosea a very, very difficult but necessary task. You see, the people had been very unfaithful to God, and in that language of they've been adulterous to God would have been common with Jeremiah the prophet, or it would have been common with Ezekiel or Isaiah. And so it's not uncommon to see it in another prophet, Hosea. However, Hosea didn't just speak it in a symbolic sense. God asked him to represent it, to show it quite literally in his marriage to a woman of harlotry. Verse 2, when the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, Go take for yourself a wife of harlotry, a children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord. Their unfaithfulness to God, their sin that they had committed, their continual act of turning to the Baals and the Asherahs and the false gods of the land, or even turning to the nature of the nations around them, was going to be represented in this real, literal marriage between this prophet and this woman, Gomer. Can you imagine the difficulty of that? It's a severe situation throughout the land, and it's going to require some sort of message to shake them into an understanding of this is how bad it is. I'm trying to communicate this to you because I love you, God's saying, but this man, Hosea, is going to marry this woman in his faithfulness, knowing that she will be unfaithful to him. It's very complicated and complex because they have children. It says that she bore him a child, and they called his name Jezreel. And the name has meaning because God said he will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. There was another child, some think it was by Hosea, some think perhaps somebody else. Difficult to make a sure case in that. And said, call her name Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor battle, by horses or horsemen. And now when she had weaned, Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. And God said, call his name Lo Ami, for you are not my people. That child's name was to represent the fact that they were no longer his people in their unfaithfulness. And this was a real literal representation of that in the lives of these people, put on display so that Israel could know and Israel could have an opportunity to repent and turn back to God. A difficult challenge. At the end of chapter 1, though, God gives this message of hope. And you would find this piece throughout the book of Hosea. Certainly in chapter 2, the latter half of it would have a message. And then you would see it throughout other chapters as well. But God says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sands of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people. There it shall be said to them, you are sons of the living God. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together and appoint for themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. There's a punishment moment, and then there's a hopeful moment, a healing moment, a unified moment, when they choose to be obedient to God. It's a difficult task for Hosea, and you know how it ends. The northern tribes, which he'll refer to as Ephraim in later chapters for sure, they're quite sinful. In fact, in chapter 4, you can see some level of their sinfulness. They're swearing, they're lying, they're killing, they're stealing, the committing of adultery. They go ahead and worship these other gods and build great tributes, and they turn back their backs on gods. Oh, they'll perform the rituals, but their heart and their intent is not in their obedience to God. And yeah, they'll call out for him, but in chapter 5, verses 3 and 4, he says, I know you, but you do not know me. There's a separation because of their unfaithfulness, their continued adulterous spiritual behavior. And in about 721, 722, the Assyrians came in, decimated them, and took them away in exile. They didn't listen to the message. Then later, 586, 587, the Babylonians would come in and do the same to Judah, take them into exile. But there was always hope. And eventually they came back, and Ezra and Nehemiah, that time period, and they rebuilt the temple and such. And it was laying the groundwork pointing towards the Messiah coming in the New Testament. Despite all that, we see we got two men given incredibly difficult tasks. What I hope we do tonight by looking at these men and kind of diving into their situation, and we're also mindful of what we have found to be difficult for us in our faith in Christianity, is we consider a perspective of how we navigate through it. And perhaps we can look through this and find evidence in their faith, qualities of their faith, ways that they lean towards God, how they were obedient, that we too can be successful spiritually and pleasing God, even when it's difficult. That's what I hope for tonight. But before we go into those discussion groups, we want to offer the invitation. You may have found your faith in a very difficult situation at the moment, and you're struggling, and you need help, and you're just like, I need it now. I can't put it off any longer. I need it now. If that's the case, let now be the time. You may have turned your back on God. You may have set him aside. You may have turned to some other life that no longer lifts him up as the priority in your life, and you may have let sin in, or you may have let the ways of the world in. You're saying, I got to come back. You may say, well, maybe at another time, but I say don't. Not another time. Let it be now. You have now. You can make a choice now. You can make use of this moment here to lean into God, to put your trust in God, to believe in his promises, because he says there's hope in Jesus. So there is hope in Jesus. He says there is salvation in obedience to the gospel. So there is salvation in obedience to the gospel. And tonight, if that's something you need, then let it be tonight that you lean and you walk and you come to him. If there's a way that we can help you, come forward as we stand and as we sing.